Reema just joined and Eduardo is now joining. So I think we have all of our presenters. So we are good. I'm just gonna do a quick audio test with Reema.
Okay.
Reema, can we test your audio real quick?
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
I can. It's a little choppy. Are you on a headset?
Yes, I'm wearing headphones.
Okay. All right.
So I can try to reconnect them.
Okay. Yeah, just cutting out just a tad. But otherwise I can hear you. Thank you so much. All right. And
This is Eduardo. Can you hear me okay?
hi, Eduardo. Yes, I can hear you. All right. And we are good to go, Greg. So I'm on standby.
Well, let's begin. So,
Okay. Fantastic. Okay, 1 moment.
thanks.
You're welcome.
Recording in progress.
Well, welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the NARALO Post ICANN78 Readout on Tuesday, the 28th of November, 2023. In the interest of time, we will not do the roll call, but all attendees' names will be noted on the wiki agenda page after today's meeting. A kind reminder to please speak clearly and slowly, and also please state your names every time you speak. For those presenting today, we encourage you to use your cameras, if at all possible, when presenting to make it a little more personal. Thank you so much, and I will now hand the meeting back over to Greg Shatan, Chair of NARALO.
Thank you, and welcome to the NARALO Post ICANN78 Readout, where we're going to find out what happened in Hamburg. This is not Hamburg behind me. This is Barbie Land. Couldn't find my Hamburg background. Maybe I'll find another background that's attractive. Oh, there's a good one. In any case, I'm happy to let you all. We have a good panel, a number of speakers, as you can see from the agenda, which is right in front of you. No reason for me to read it out, but I'm excited to have this readout. And since the welcome and introduction says that I'm doing this along with Nayela, why don't you do your part of the welcome and introduction?
Thank you, Greg. I have just normal background here, just my normal house, so nothing exciting as Greg. Hello, everyone. It's really great to see you here. Those of you we saw in Hamburg, good to see you again. Really excited to be joining this readout that I know, Greg, you've put a lot of work in making sure these happen after each ICANN meeting, which is, I think, they're wonderful for hearing about what happened in Hamburg and hearing what people thought about what happened in Hamburg. So I just wanted to welcome everyone. So it's really great to have this. I can share with you some numbers that we're starting to get from Hamburg participation. It was a really good meeting. It was, as you know, the annual general meeting. So typically the larger of the three meetings that happen in ICANN. Attendance included, so of course it was a hybrid meeting. We have an overall attendance was 2,512 people attended the meeting. 663 of those were online and 1,849 were in person. So a fairly large meeting. I think we can say that we're inching back closely to our attendance rates pre-pandemic. I think we're getting back in that healthy range. And then certainly for North America, we haven't experienced a huge drop during the pandemic. So we are getting back to, you know, what we expect to see from our region in these meetings. This was a very large meeting in terms of people represented from different countries. I think our meetings team recorded 170 countries/territories represented at this meeting. So very good attendance, very good representation from different parts of the world. And I think overall it was a very, it was a good meeting to be at, and enjoyed listening to different discussions. And some of them will be coming up here in this in this readout. So that's all from me for now. Greg, thank you, and back over to you.
So the point of this is to help both those who are at ICANN 78 to make sense of what they participated in, and for those who were not, to bring them up to speed. Of course, we're doing this from an at-large perspective, although we have a variety of perspectives represented here. But it is first and foremost a perspective from the view of the end users. So that we have our three ALAC members initially taking the microphone, each of them talking about aspects of ICANN 78 and also, of course, the ALAC 20th anniversary with cake that we had. So I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan Zuck, and I promise, Jonathan, I will not put you up behind me as a background while you're speaking. Jonathan, please go ahead.
Thanks, Greg. Yeah, I just keep getting older, so as long as you keep using an old photo, I guess that's all right. Thanks for having me on this. I'm a proud representative of NARALO to the at-large advisory committee, and we did have a very interesting meeting in Hamburg and covered a number of different issues. I would say that if we looked at sort of umbrella, the two big issues that are really in front of us, one is the upcoming next round of new GTLDs that's due in the next 3 years or so, and all of the preparations surrounding that. So there's different policy issues that need to be addressed and questions that need to be answered to prepare ICANN for that process. The at-large community is focused in particular on just a few aspects of that. One is making sure that the pool of applicants for new strings is wider than it's been in the past. There was a stated objective in the 2012 round that we really reach out into underserved areas of the globe, and that was an abject failure in the last round. And so making sure that failure is not repeated has been a primary goal of the at-large community with respect to the next round. So we've worked on issues such as applicant support, a reform of how contentions, like two people applying for the same string, are handled, community priority evaluations, all about the audiences that we want to see better represented as registries in the DNS, getting a better chance at getting the strings they want, so that it's not just the usual suspects and a game for millionaires in the next round. The other piece of it is just making sure that we avoid some of the unintended consequences that we saw in the last round. One was that all these new domains became available, and all the DNS abuse, the cyber squatting, the phishing, et cetera, all ran to the new TLDs. And so, taking a hard look at why that was the case has been important to the at-large community as well. And we've been working for the last number of years on, getting the community engaged on mitigating the instances of DNS abuse. So that's a big part of the conversations that we're having at ICANN, is about this next round and how we ensure both the intended consequences take place and that the unintended consequences do not. The other issue that continues to be discussed at ICANN is an upcoming discussion by the United Nations about sort of the future of internet governance. Back nearly 20 years ago, there was a meeting in Tunis where it was really explored in depth what the role of ICANN should be vis-a-vis other internet governance structures, whether the multi-stakeholder model was working or it should be more of a multilateral approach. And the net result of that was the creation of the Internet Governance Forum as a more UN-focused discussion around internet governance and leaving ICANN largely alone. And in the interim, the United States sort of let loose the last tether that it had on ICANN so that it's truly become an independent international organization. And so that conversation is now nearing its 20th anniversary, and those conversations will be brought up again in full, and ICANN will once again be under the microscope because there's decisions that ICANN has made that some view as questionable. There's been policies that have taken a long time to get implemented at ICANN. So there's a lot of open conversations about whether ICANN is the best model for managing the DNS. I think those of us that are engaged in it on a day-to-day basis believe that it's like Churchill's view of democracy, that it's terrible, but better than all of the alternatives. And so we prefer to work within the system to continue to try and improve it, to continue to better represent the interests of individual end users in those discussions amongst the commercial and legal interests that sometimes hold sway, but that we believe that as a structure, that it's the one that stands the best chance of seeing those interests improved in the internet naming and numbers space. So we continue to work on issues related to that. And Reema Moussa, who's part of NARALO, led an amazing discussion about WSIS plus 20 and what kind of messaging and work that the community needs to do to make sure that ICANN is shown in its best light as this 20th anniversary approaches. So I would say, Greg, those are the two big things that continue to be discussed and stay on the top of the list amongst many others. But it's this next round and the next meeting of WSIS about a year from now in 2024. So, but happy to answer questions about individual things or go into more detail. But that's my overview, if that's helpful.
Thank you, Jonathan. Certainly helpful. And we'll have time for Q&A later on in the program. But right now we can go to our next ALAC representative from NARALO, Bill Jouris.
Okay, I've actually got slides. If someone wants to know, right, I'm going to go a little deeper into some of the technical odds and ends that turned up in the discussion of the next round. It's by no means a comprehensive look at everything that got talked about, but more in the nature of a couple of examples of why it isn't all smooth sailing getting to the next round. Next slide, please. One of the hot topics is closed generics. That would be things like .book, .wrench, .gun, .tv, pick your favorite noun or even verb, I suppose. .book being perhaps the type case. The question arises, suppose that Amazon decides to register .book. Well, every other bookseller, not to mention probably every publisher, is going to have a problem with that. So there have been lots of discussions about what kind of policies and procedures could be put in place to deal with these, or is it not possible to deal with them? And there have been, which Jonathan can undoubtedly talk at length about, a facilitated dialogue, which I think means a referee, between ALAC, the GAC, the Government Affairs Committee, and the GNSO, the Generic Name Support Organization. And the final conclusion, we were told, was irreconcilable differences. The result that came out of that was the ALAC and the GAC were in agreement, and we have sent a joint advice to the board basically saying, don't do this. As I say, the first report I got on why there was no agreement was that the GNSO had different ways they wanted to go and couldn't sign on to that. But I was fascinated last week when NARALO did their readout that the gentleman from the GNSO said, oh, we agreed this is a bad idea, but I couldn't sign on because it hadn't gone through the GNSO policy process. So whichever version you want to take about why they didn't sign on to the advice to the board that says don't do it, the net result's the same. We have told the board there isn't a way to do this that we can see that would actually work, and we will see what the board chooses to do. Next slide, please. Another issue has to do with details on names. This was raised by folks here in North America, specifically in the previous round. The folks in Quebec registered .Quebec because the last round was strictly ASCII, and because I think they have experience with keyboards and before that with typewriters that don't do diacritic marks, they registered the first one. For this round, with internationalized domain names, they just can now get Quebec spelled correctly. So they had a couple of problems here. The first one is, since the letter E and the letter E with an acute are not variants, basically anybody can come in and bid for that Quebec spelled correctly. And the folks who had .Quebec already had a problem with that, not surprisingly. There are also some issues about, should they have to pay full price for something that's merely a variant and stuff. So the GNSO has been working on that. The problem, as they see it, is when the Latin generation panel decided what was and what was not a variant, those two were not made variants. So you can't just insist that the same people ought to have them. As an aside, the reason that those aren't variants is, in my opinion, some really bad guidance that the panel got from the Internationalization of Domain Names Project, but nonetheless, there we are. So, as I say, the GNSO has been struggling with this for at least since the beginning of the year, when the .Quebec folks came and initially talked to Glenn McKnight, who was at the time the ALAC secretary and also happens to live in Canada, in Toronto. And I got into the discussion, and now it's off to the GNSO to try and get them to come up with a solution. And they're struggling with it. And at the moment, they're struggling with it on a basis of, how can we make a one-time exception because this is a unique problem? And I have some doubts about that. Next slide, please. Here are a couple of names. San Jose, the capital of Costa Rica, and San Jose, which, as you may know, is a town in California next to Silicon Valley. In Costa Rica, the name is spelled correctly with an accent over the E. In California, of course, it is spelled without the accent. Back when the Latin Generation Panel's report went out for public comment, a professor in Spain wrote to us and said, people who speak Spanish understand that the correct spelling is with the accent, but in words that use the accent, if we see the word without the accent, we will understand this to be the same word. And therefore, those probably ought to be variants. And the Latin panel basically blew him off, saying, well, that's just one guy's opinion. But that, I think, is indicative of the fact that words from French, from Spanish, possibly other languages as well, although I haven't dug into them, are going to have this problem. Quebec is, in short, not unique. So I suspect the GNSO will come up with some kind of one-time solution for Quebec and then discover that they have a generic problem. The best solution, to my mind, and one I don't believe anybody is even considering, is to have the IDN project go back to the Latin script and think about variants a little more, not just can you tell the difference visually, but are these used interchangeably, which is a situation I think we'll see a lot of. Anyway, those are a couple of the issues that are going to arise in the next round. They are being struggled with, but they haven't been definitively solved yet. I suspect before too much longer, the board will decide what they're doing about closed generics, at least as far as are we going to allow them? And if they decide they are, then there will be another crash project to figure out how to deal with them. As for variants, GNSO is struggling with their unique case, and where it will go beyond that, I have no idea. Anyway, that's it for me. Be happy to take questions whenever we get around to them, Greg.
Thank you, Bill. Just to add a little bit more color on the issue of closed generics, I was the ALAC representative to the facilitated dialogue. Alan Greenberg was the alternate, and both of us participated as much on an equal footing as possible. The irreconcilable differences between, let's say, a fairly large faction of the GNSO and just about everyone else really went to the heart of the issues of what kind of process would there be to determine whether a closed generic should go forward. And the ultimate test was the public interest, which, as anybody around ICANN knows, we know when we see it, but we can't define it. And so that was an issue. There were issues around what the test should be in terms of the public interest versus other interests. And while we did come up with a bunch of ideas about process, a lot of the most thorny questions got put on a list of questions we couldn't answer. So that's really the heart of the substantive irreconcilable differences within the group. Then there were differences that emerged between the GNSO and the GAC and ALAC with regard to how to tell the board that this was a bad idea, at least until we had a better idea of how to do it. And there is, a stated position of the GNSO that this would have been policy advice, and that the GNSO Council can't give policy advice without itself having a PDP to render that policy advice for the GNSO to ratify and hand to the board. I think that may have also been a political calculus of how to deal with the people who want closed generics to go forward in this round and those who didn't, was to basically hang it on a technicality, say that they couldn't really say it, and that we have the GNSO, or rather the GAC and the ALAC, kind of carry the water. As Alan notes, irreconcilable differences is really, somewhat of an informal reference, perhaps just between us and the at-large community. Was not a formal position of the outcome of the facilitated dialogue by its participants or by its chartering organizations. So I don't want people to think that is somehow an outcome per se. Indeed, we thought in the group that we would be asked to go back to round 2 and do more work. But the determination was made that closed generics were not on the critical path for the next round. And that was why we were initially told by all 3 of the chartering organizations to stand down our work. In any case, that's probably more than enough discussion of of closed generics, as fascinating as they are. But even more fascinating is, of course, Eduardo Diaz. And I'm going to turn the microphone over to Eduardo for his thoughts on ICANN 78. Eduardo?
Thank you, Greg. I was very curious about this session. It's happened Sunday about 1:15 in the afternoon. I thought it was going to be a technical per se thing, and it had to do with the root servers, which I know some about it, but I was curious about this. Please, next one, please. But this was really an in-depth, look at the root server system, explaining the critical role in the DNS, and it is one of the missions of ICANN, maintaining the DNS security and stability. So it's a major functionality that happens within the DNS. These are some definitions there: root zone, root server operators, and so forth. And next one, please. So I will give you highlight points and the things that people hear about root zone and root server system. And I remember when I started in ICANN that I asked what the root zone was, and nobody could explain it in layman's words what the root zone. And it's really in the starting point. It's a list of general top-level domains. And the root server system is the one that sends the data. Basically, that's the big difference. Next one, please. You can see it in this, by the way, these slides are from the presentations that they were giving there. You see IANA doing the provisioning, and then there's a root zone maintainer. That's a root zone. That's where all the GTLDs are. And this information is sent to the operators, and then they serve the DNS system and us as a user. Please, next one. So, I really ask questions about how you send IANA send information from their servers to the operators. I say, well, no, we're talking about the operations, so that's another course. That's their videos about that. They say, well, fine. So I was curious. This is the development of the root servers. I was curious why it ended up at 13 root servers. I say, well, why there are only 13? They said, oh, because that has to do with the size of the protocol address and so forth and so forth. I said, well, I didn't ask more about it because I don't know about the protocol, but there are only 13 servers around the world. Please, next one. Okay, and basically those are the root servers. But now there are copies and copies and copies and copies and copies from these root servers. Once they created this thing, is called Anycast, and I will talk about that very rapidly. But the next one, please. The thing is that this is a very good graph, a very interesting graph about the billions of queries that these servers receive. And you notice by the pandemic, when we got it 2019 to 2021, you see it went like it almost went up. I won't say it went about 50% over. It increased very rapidly and then went down after the pandemic. Just people started coming back to work, and so they get billions and billions and billions of queries. And I said, well, how these little operators can manage this? And the next one, please. Well, they use something like before the Anycast, and I'm going to explain this very fast. When you have unicast, it's what you do with, when you connect to a server, it's a unicast. I go from here to a server, and the server provides me the page. So that it goes from all the way to the end and here. And Anycast, and this has to do with networks. The next one, please. And when they created this Anycast, this is contrary to the principles of the internet, where it says, everyone in the internet has to have a single IP address. Well, Anycast is the same IP all over the place. So what happens? They make copies of the servers and they put the servers close to where the users are. For example, here in Puerto Rico, we have a copy of the air root server. So when we do query, we don't go all the way to the servers. We go to the closest one, which is the IP that is closest to us, and we query that. So this is how it's distributed. Now, what happens when you do this? The next one, please, which I found very interesting about, DNS abuse and things like that. Well, when you get a distributed denial of service attack, let's say you do it from here, from Puerto Rico, well, it will affect only the root copy of the server here, because it will go to that server. It will not go all the way to the root servers. In fact, when they put Anycast, these operators, the queries are very small. They almost don't get any queries at all because they are served by all these multiple distribution of their servers all around the world. Anyhow, that's my talk. I was very, very curious about this. I didn't know about this part of the network. And also they talked about how different each operator is, the fact that they're in different countries, the fact that they have different legislation there, the fact that they have different financial systems, the fact that the implementations in them, even though they provide the same thing, the type of equipment stuff that they do and they operate, they're different. That gives resilience to the system. Not all of them are the same. So that's the difference in the way they operate in the different countries. It gives resilience to the system because, like I said, nobody works the same way. So that's about it. And I really like this session. It didn't have to do with policy, but it really did have to do with one of the major things in the internet. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Eduardo. I think this goes back to kind of the beginning of ICANN, when it was thought that root zone management was going to be the primary job of ICANN, and there might be a little policy work on the side. As we all know, that isn't quite how it worked out, but it's good to go back to first principles. And if we don't know how the root zone works, just about everything else that we do is not going to be quite right. So I think it's very important to have a working knowledge as much of the technology as possible. So we're now going to hear a perspective from quote unquote newer eyes, since the first three speakers had a combined age of close to 200 years. We're going to turn to Reema Moussa, who was an ICANN 78 fellow and also participated in the ICANN 20th anniversary session at ICANN 78. And Reema will tell us about some of the highlights of ICANN 78 from her perspective. Reema, please go ahead.
Thank you, Greg. And I'll quickly disclaim that I actually was not an ICANN 78 fellow. I was a fellow at ICANN 76, but I was at ICANN 78 nonetheless, and was very happy to be there. So, as was said, I am relatively new to ICANN. I only came in for ICANN 76. That was my first meeting in Cancun earlier this year. And since then, I've been able to go to ICANN 78 and also engage in different substantive issues right now. I'm doing some work on applicant support. So I'm still very new to everything, but very excited to be engaging more. And I guess my remarks here, I'll try to keep them short and big picture. During the 25th anniversary session, which I think was really a moment to acknowledge how far ICANN has come and all the work that's been done so far, and how exciting it is that things have really developed and grown so much more than what the internet's initial pioneers perhaps even could have dreamed the internet could be and what it would mean for our world. it's really an exciting moment to be celebrating that 25-year anniversary. And for me, as someone who is also celebrating my 25-year anniversary, so to speak, it's interesting because I have literally grown up with the internet. It's always been a part of my life. And so being able to engage with ICANN and see how policy decisions are made in this environment that really determines the functioning of the internet at the most foundational level, as far as its structure, was really inspiring. And so to that point, I think something that was salient to me throughout ICANN 78 and for my time with ICANN generally is the importance of engaging the youth generation in ICANN's very important work and making sure that ICANN's role in internet governance doesn't get lost among the emerging environment that is becoming increasingly complex, increasingly multi-stakeholdered, and making sure that the next generation of internet governance leaders really have awareness of ICANN's role and get involved with it. And so the ICANN Fellowship, of course, is, I think, a really important part of that mission. But as far as the role that each of you could play individually, and that the community could play, I think the role of mentorship and community is incredibly important for people from my generation, especially insofar as ICANN, when it began, was, a relatively small community. In some ways it still is, and you were all building something together. I recognize a lot of the names in this room, and I know from talking to you that you've been around in this space for a long time, and so you've seen how things have grown, but also have actively contributed to that. And so now for folks from my generation, we're really coming into something that has a long history, that has a lot of infrastructure around it, that has all these acronyms, as we know, but want to contribute actively. And so the way for us to do that is to really learn from folks who have been in this space for some time, and have, I think, at least from my personal experience, have close mentorship to assist in really understanding both ICANN's role and then some of these foundational complexities of how ICANN works and how the multi-stakeholder model as a whole works. So I encourage all of you in your respective constituencies and your respective engagements within ICANN to take people in and really support them. From my personal experience, and the reason I have stuck around with ICANN for now these couple of months is because I've had people essentially volunteer me, like, oh, do you want to work on this project, or this research on applicant support might be interesting to you. It has to do with capacity development. It has to do with global equity and things like this, which are things that I care about, things that many from my generation care about, etc. So I encourage you all to engage in that exercise of bringing people in. And then just quickly, I'll add on that we, I might have gotten lost. Okay, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yes, okay, great. So wonderful. I'll quickly just add on that we're in this moment of heightened global conflict, and that can really present some issues for the continuation of the global stakeholder model, multi-stakeholder model. And I encourage you all to keep that in mind. I know the last presentation discussed security as a priority, and I think that one element that I saw present at ICANN78 and in discussions in other groups that I'm involved with is the notion that the internet could become a cyber battleground, so to speak, especially at a time where global polarization is so high. So I think keeping an eye on that as well, and DNS security is incredibly important. So I'll end there, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Reema. I'll note but not read an excellent comment that Siranush Vardanian made in the chat in response to Reema's thoughts. And thank you, Reema, so much for sharing them with us, and also for your continued participation in ICANN. We were all new once, and it's great to see new blood and people with different perspectives and different concerns. But ultimately, in my mind, coming back to the end user who, more than anything else, wants a safe and available internet. And regardless of what conflict may be raging around them. Well, that I don't want to go off in a tangent, so we're speaking on ICANN78, but in any case, it kind of goes behind everything we do, that we are trying to have a free and open and interoperable internet for everyone. Next, I'm going to turn over the microphone to Michael Karakash, who from the ICANN org. He's a policy research and implementation manager, and he's going to give us an overview of the various sub-pro implementation review team sessions, some of which I was at as well. This is just another example of, as Jonathan mentioned, how the next round, which we used to call sub-pro for subsequent procedures, since nobody wanted to admit that the next procedure would be around, or that we were going to have more than one of them, or that we would, if we talked about only one of them, that we might never have one of them. But in any case, it's still sub-pro in our hearts, and I'm going to turn it over to Michael Karakash for his presentation. Michael?
Perfect. Thanks, Greg. I hope you can all hear me. Thanks for the introduction. Yes, we're starting to call it next round now, though internally we still have sub-pro, and the IRT is the sub-pro IRT, as you mentioned, which could be a little confusing for some. Also, apologies for whoever's controlling the slides. I made the slide deck a bit longer. I'm not going to read everything. It's just for your reference. I added a lot of links that might be helpful for you later on. So I'm going to be consistently saying next slide, next slide. Sorry about that. Next slide. One more. Thank you so much. So before I go into the overview of the sessions from the ICANN78 sub-pro IRT, I wanted to give a brief overview for those who are not well-versed in the history of how we got to this point. Really quickly, in March 2023, the board resolved to instruct ICANN org to begin the implementation on the scorecard that I linked there. You can click it on your free time. It makes good casual reading. The ICANN board approved at that moment 98 of the recommendations and marked 38 of them as pending. We published an implementation plan that you can click and see there on your own time as well. The board engaged with the council on the pending recommendations, and it was transmitted. The council transmitted it to the board in another clarifying statement. Next slide, please. And on September 10th, 2023 of this year, a few months ago, there was another scorecard. In this scorecard, 20 outputs were adopted by the board, 7 were not adopted, and 13 were moved into pending. So more progress was made on that. Next slide, please. Next slide. So I felt that this was important to show a regional breakdown of the IRT and some statistics. You can see for the North America region down below, we have about 21 participants there. And you can see the breakdown amongst the other regions. And above, we have 84 members. We've held 23 meetings so far, actually 24 now. There was one this morning. This deck was made yesterday, and we also have 3 separate subtracks that we'll mention later, RSP and ASP. Next slide, please. And this is just more information that you can look at as well on your own time. Again, we have the workstream lead being Lars Hoffman, and I work closely with him, and then the 2 council liaisons down below. Next slide, please. So jumping into the heart of the presentation, these are the topics that we were discussing during ICANN 78. Next slide. We started with the role of application comments, the first session on the 21st. Next slide. So here's a topic overview. Quickly, you can see these are the outputs. There's an affirmation, into a recommendation, and implementation guidance that were relevant in informing the drafting of the applicant guidebook sections. And briefly, the way we've structured the IRT is that org drafts language. We present it to a first reading to the IRT. The IRT provides feedback. We incorporate that feedback, and then we send out a new draft, and then we have a second reading, so 2 IRT sessions, ideally per topic, to be able to incorporate all the feedback we received. So on this one, you can see that one of the major affirmations was that ICANN will open a comment period, which is the application comment period, at the time the applications are publicly posted. You can get more in depth on this recommendation, but one of the main one was the new GTLD program must be clear and transparent about that role of the application comments. So we've been developing language to work on that. Next slide, please. So you can see the common action period was the important section that came out of that. We're calling it CAP for short, the community action period, and it's going to take place 90 calendar days. And this was in discussions with the IRT when we came up with this figure, and we broke this section down into 5 different sections below, as you can see, and each section of the applicant guidebook per topic is structured very differently based on the amount of text that's needed. So this is one of the longer sections here. And on your own time, you can look more further into this section. I don't want to take up too much time. Next slide, please. The second one we discussed in the same session was applications assessed in rounds. Next slide. So this one had many outputs that helped us in the drafting of this. The main recommendation here in bold is upon the commencement of the next application submission period, there must be clarity around the timing from that point forth, and specifically on the commencement of the next application submission period. So there were many recommendations here. You can see all of them in the final report that's linked above, but next slide. The draft language for this took into recommendations 3.2 from the final report, making us committed to the new GTLDs taking place at regular and predictable intervals. Again, this was one of the examples. Feedback was received during this session, a lot of feedback. We made updates to the language, and a new version was recently circulated a few days ago, and the IRT was happy with that new language. So you can see how there's like a feedback loop that's happening, and the community is really important and crucial in making sure that we are drafting the language in accordance with all the outputs that were received. Next slide, please. So I'm going to spend a very little amount of time on this registry system testing. Next slide. We have the tech services team that is the SME on this topic. It's policy related, of course, but our tech services team are working closely on ensuring that this is being implemented and being drafted. There's these 2 recommendations that are very important. The registry system testing, and has to be very efficient. I'm not the SME on this. Francisco and his team is on that. So they gave a very thorough presentation during the meeting, but we'll skip ahead with this one. Here are some more details that are more technical in theory, so we'll skip this. And one of the largest sessions and the last session we held was on applicant support. And I know Jonathan mentioned that this is a big priority for ALAC as well, along with CPE and contention resolution. Next slide. So as you can see, there are multiple recommendations on ASP, and ASP even has its own subtrack that's been starting to discuss these recommendations. You can see that there's 17.1 all the way to 17.19 with specific recommendations for us to follow through. There's a brief explanation. Clearly, the final report outputs are much more detailed on this, but you can see a brief summary of what each one is related to on this. Next slide. So quickly, what is ASP for those who don't know? So it's a complementary initiative of the new program, and it's seeking to increase the diversity of applicants. Of course, as Jonathan mentioned, that's a very important reason that this program is around, to ensure that the underserved regions are being served and there's a diverse applicant pool. Those who demonstrate financial need and support the public interests may qualify. You can see here the more detailed 75 to 85% reduction in the fees and application, and access to many services such as pro bono services to assist with that. There's also a bid and credit multiplier in connection to this, and you can find out more by reading about this and joining the subtrack. Next slide, please. We're almost done. There's one more slide after this. So again, there was an expression of interest survey that went out that is still open, and it was open in June, it closed and is reopened now, and it's trying to seek more information on what they can provide, as what pro bono services will be available. You can see regionally there's a breakdown there as well. North America had 6 there represented, and a large chunk as well from Europe and Africa and Asia. Next slide, please. Again, you can see some ongoing work, as I mentioned, with ASP. There was the GNSO guidance process that was initiated on this in November of 2022, and it's nearing its end now, with a final report to be published in a few weeks in December. They've been doing a lot of work on that. I'm sure y'all are aware. The current status you can see down below. It was introduced during ICANN 78 that there will be 6 separate ASP subtrack sessions specifically on this topic. And a full IRT session will happen in the future with a wrap-up session to have the ASP handbook in place. And that was my last slide. I'm sure there will be some Q&A later. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Michael. Really appreciate that. Taking us through all of the work on the next round. Even that's the tip of the iceberg. There's so much going on. At the IRT meeting this morning on SubPro, Lars Hoffman, who's helping to run that group, went through all the dependencies and various outboard pieces of work that are going on. And I think there were at least a dozen. So it is... And based on my experience around the previous round, it's just going to be more and more all-consuming as we move along. So speaking of moving along, we can move along in our agenda. Next, we're going to hear about ever popular topic, or the latest version of it, now the registration data request service. And Yuko Yokoyama from ICANN.org, Program Director of Strategic Initiatives, will give a presentation on the brand spanking new-ish registration data request service. Yuko?
Thank you, Greg. Hi, everybody. My name is Yuko from ICANN.org. I'm going to give you a quick update about Registration Data Service, or RDRS, formerly known as WHOIS Disclosure System, if you've been following this service. Next slide, please. So just a quick reminder what this is. It is a proof of concept system that is meant to run for 2 years only, in hope of helping boards' determination about the SSAD recommendations that are currently pending. And this service is much simpler than SSAD. It doesn't come with accreditation or identity verification. It is free, and it will connect GTLD registration data requesters with the data holders. In this case, it's ICANN accredited registrars and not registries. This is because of the proof of concept service. It does not have any contractual requirement or policy backing for registrars to have to participate. Therefore, it is a voluntary service. Next slide, please. So it's a single platform to submit a request. It's one place, one-stop shop, hopefully, for everybody to go to request GTLD non-public registration data. And it uses the standardized form, and registrars would still be determining the disclosure decisions, because no system can change the fact that there are applicable laws that they need to follow in terms of disclosing of the personal information. Next slide, please. Real quick, in terms of the benefits to requesters, considering that this group of people may be more of the requester side. So it provides consistency as opposed to requesters, data requesters going through different processes and requirement from other registrars, varying registrars. The tool will find the registrars for you, so you don't have to investigate on your own who manages the domain name that you would like the data for. A standardized form, regardless of who the receiving registrar is. And it has attachment capability, portal view for past and current pending requests. There's a template as well as a feature to ask for expedited review. So flag to the registrars if you want a faster processing time. Next slide, please. So now about ICANN 78 recap. So since this was so close to the launch time, we didn't have anything new to discuss. It was really at the end of our development time, so it was tidying up things. So it was more of an engagement-focused meeting. So you see that we've had varying sessions with a small team meeting. We were invited to speak at RRSG membership meeting as well as APAC to talk to registrars to solicit their participation in this volunteer service. And we've also been invited by IPC membership meeting to again spread the words and to showcase what this service can do for the requesters. And beyond that, we've also been engaging with other entities and forums such as IGF, BC membership meetings, Intel leadership meetings, and the list goes on and on. We have future engagement plans as well. Through all these engagement, good perspectives and feedback have already been received. So obviously the system isn't launched and done. There's always a versioning up discussion with the GNSO Standing Committee. So that work will continue for the next 2-year duration, as long as the system is operating. But overall, this has been a good meeting, and that, definitely the awareness is being raised. Next slide, please. So the RDRS actually launched today, this morning, Pacific time. So that was a great milestone for all of us. We currently have 50 plus registrars participating, opted in to use it. And those registrars cover about 51% of the total GTLD DUMs. Obviously, we would continue our engagement with the registrars as well as requesters so that the number would go up and that we can create a good reporting out to the board in terms of what the demand may be for the next 2 years. There's also survey functionality so that if you use the system, there's always a survey available to collect your feedback so that to make sure that we're creating something that suits your needs. Next slide, please. This is it. There are helpful links there. If you are interested, I'm sure the deck would be made available to you, but thank you for your time.
Well, thank you, Yuko. Thank you for bringing us through that. For all of us who've worked on various aspects of WHOIS and its issues, and I've worked on it less than many other people in this group, and I think of Alan Greenberg among many others who have suffered. It's good to see something coming out of all of that. Now we have, perhaps saving the best for last, we have Leon Sanchez, who's a member of the ICANN board, not just any old member of the ICANN board, but the ICANN board member selected by the at-large community. And we're very lucky to have Leon with us. Without further ado, Leon, take it away.
Thank you very much, Greg. Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to be with my at-large colleagues and of course with every RALO and of course NARALO in this case. And well, as you know, before every ICANN public meeting, the board holds a 3-day workshop. So of course, ICANN78 wasn't the exception, and the board held a 3-day workshop prior to kicking off the activities of ICANN78 in Hamburg. And a few highlights from these 3-day workshop were discussions around strategic planning. To this end, the board held what we call an environmental scan session. So what we do is that we form breakout groups. We discuss the different trends that we see emerging in the ecosystem, and we try to, of course, see how they relate to ICANN's mission and to the things we do at ICANN. So we brainstorm around these trends, and we provide them as input for the strategic planning process. As you know, we have kicked off the next 5 fiscal year strategic plan process. And I believe on December 13, there will be a session, a public session led by org on the process and how the different parts of the community can feed into this process. So this is one of the highlights that I can share with you about this 3-day workshop prior to ICANN78. We also heard from org, and I mean, Yuko has updated us already with the RDRS progress in terms of the policy implementation. And well, back then, I believe we had about 10% of the domains under management already opted into this process. As of ICANN78, this was as of October 16, and by ICANN78, it was expected that we would reach between the 42 and 46%, and I believe that to date that number has rise to about 51% of the domains under management that have opted into this process. So, of course, this is a welcome policy implementation progress for the whole community. We also discussed the Global Public Interest Framework, the next steps. As you know, this is a framework that has been shaped by both org, the board, and at some point also the community provided us with input on how to build this global public interest framework. And what we have done is to apply this global public interest framework into the decision-making process of the board. So we discussed learnings on how we applied this framework to our decision-making process, and of course try to learn from these experiences. And there is a paper that has been published. I don't have the link handy to post it to the chat, but this paper, I promise to send the link over the mailing list. This paper highlights or describes how we applied this framework into our decision-making process, the learning experiences that we gathered, and of course, a little bit of the next steps that we will be taking into enhancing the application or the use of this framework. Then we also discussed the notion of creating an internal audit function area. So this it ended up being approved by a resolution in our regular meeting on October 26th. We created, or we instructed the org to create an internal audit function that will be reporting to the board risk committee, but with support from the CFO. So of course, this internal audit function will provide with some advantages to the organization. As you know, we have already in place some external audit function, but we also thought, and org proposed, that it would be a good idea to also have this internal audit function, because it can help us strengthen the compliance, to also strengthen our internal controls, to enhance efficiency, to improve security, to verify the accuracy and integrity of our financial statements, and also help minimize risk. So this is, I believe, a welcome move towards enhancing all the processes within the organization, and to, of course, build more reliable processes within the organization. We also held two meetings during, board meetings during ICANN78. One was a regular meeting of the board, and we approved different resolutions. You can have a look at those resolutions in the website, in the board's resolutions website. But maybe it's worth highlighting the SIAC member appointments, the approval of the internal audit function, as I just mentioned, the fiscal year 25 strategic outlook trend report, our revisiting board action on CCWG auction proceeds recommendation. As you know, this has also been a little bit in top of mind of some parts of the community. And also we passed some resolutions on pending recommendations on the new GTLD sub-pro policy development process final report, the next round funding request. And we also thanked our parting board members, between them Avridoria, who is also a member of NARALO and of at large, a very highly esteemed colleague of us, and also Matthew Shears, who is also a highly esteemed colleague. And they ended their terms in ICANN78, and we thank them for all their contributions and all the work they delivered while they were part of the board. So this, in a nutshell, was what the board was up to during ICANN78. And I believe another important topic was the discussions we had around the upcoming WSIS Plus 20 meeting. And of course, as you might be aware, a number of board members attended the IGF in Kyoto as part of the board delegation to the IGF, during which we, of course, held different meetings. Of the one that I think was worth highlighting, and for me the most meaningful, was lunch that we had with Doreen Bogdan, the current Secretary General of the ITU, and we discussed with her, of course, how we could support the multi-stakeholder model, and how we could promote others, and embracing and supporting these multi-stakeholder models. So I thought it was a very good meeting with her. And of course, some other meetings and panels that we held during the IGF. So yes, Doreen Bogdan Martin. So with that, Greg, I'd like to turn it back to you, and I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Thank you, Leon. Very helpful. And as you mentioned, when we're talking about ICANN board members, we have to give a shout out to Doria, outgoing ICANN board member. We already miss her on the board. I'm glad that she could participate in today's session. In terms of today's session, we have reached the point in the agenda when it is the time for Q&A. The moderators for this will, to the extent that this needs moderation, both myself and Adrian Schmidt, who many of you know. Adrian is the newly elected secretariat of NARALO, and under our structure, that means he's essentially the only other officer other than myself. So we have a two-man pirate ship here. In any case, this is a time for questions and answers, comments. A lot of us were at ICANN78, and if any of you want to share thoughts you might have, even if they're not in the form of a question, we can do that, especially time permitting. I hope that there are some people who have something to say about their ICANN, because I'm not seeing any hands up right now. Marita Moll, please go ahead.
Okay, Greg, thanks. Marita Moll speaking. Saving you here from the terrible silence. No, I'm just gonna throw in the fact that At Large did hold, as I said in the chat, a specific session on WSIS plus 20. Thanks to Leon for mentioning that. As the end user community, it's very important for us to be involved in the WSIS plus 20 discussions to any extent that we can. And so we did hold a very interesting session that consisted of a bit of a readout about what ICANN was doing, and a representative from the business community, representative from the GAC, Government Advisory Committee, and myself just talking about what's happening next with WSIS plus 20 and how we can somehow try to get some of the views in there to support the multi-stakeholder system, because WSIS plus 20 is, of course, a multilateral process in which other groups don't necessarily have standing. And I just wanted to mention that there are meetings going on in Geneva, one in March and one in May, on this topic, and that there is a questionnaire to be filled out on an ITU site, I believe, where groups, ALSs, and individuals can enter their views. They're looking for the views of people and talking about WSIS plus 20 multi-stakeholder system and other parts as well. That's all I'll say. Thank you.
Thank you, Marita. I see Adrian, last time I looked, was driving in a car, so probably a little hard for him to co-moderate. But you never know what superpowers Adrian might have. Still looking for any other questions or comments. We have Jonathan Zuck saving me from silence.
I guess it's what we call the late night radio DJ syndrome, right? But I'll just bring up something silly, which is that it was also the 20th anniversary of the At-Large Advisory Committee. And we had a party for that. And for that party, we had kind of a train theme throughout the meeting, which culminated in a party that took place at the location of the world's largest model train set, over 15,000 square feet, and I created a little book to commemorate it, which was a little version of the little engine that could. That is a story that many of us in the North America are familiar with. So I'll post in the link to the PDF here in the chat for anyone that didn't get a chance to see little engine that could as the ALAC.
Thank you, Jonathan. And I'm sorry we didn't book you for a dramatic reading of your version of the little engine that could. You gave us one at ICANN 78, which was quite choice. So that was certainly a high point. Adrian, we hear from you from the open road. Please go ahead.
Yeah, just to clarify that I'm not driving. It's actually my wife driving. I am in the car. But just to thank all of you, Greg, Marita, and many others who have helped me in this different transition. Glenn couldn't make it this time, but I'm still getting a lot of support from him as well. So we are here to serve whatever you need. I will do my best to help with the transition and with whatever we need to do going forward. And it was a great experience to be with all together. I'm looking forward to whatever comes after. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. And thank you for clarifying that you're only riding in the car. I should have figured that out since the window was on your right and you're not in the right-hand drive country. In any case, thank you for that. I think we can, unless we have other comments, which are always invited, of course, we can move on to the next agenda item, which is a look forward to ICANN 79, which is not far away, either chronologically or geographically. It will be taking place in early March in San Juan, Puerto Rico. And that, of course, is in ICANN's North American region, which means that NARALO will be your host or our host, RALO, within at large, and that will bring us, additional responsibilities and privileges. Of course, we get to use the ICANN jet and helicopter, being the host RALO. But more seriously, we will be looking to provide at least one substantive panel that will be organized specifically about issues that of interest, particularly to North Americans, and also some form of a social event if we can. And I hear from those who are in Puerto Rico that for those of us who were at the last ICANN in San Juan, the area around the convention center is going to look quite a bit different, a lot livelier. There's been quite a bit of development around it. So we will be looking forward to ICANN 79 too, where I'm sure we're going to be hearing a whole lot about various aspects of next rounds, as particularly about applicant support, and we're be hearing about various who is related things. I think we've covered a lot of the high points on this call about things that we might be expecting in ICANN 79, and of course there's always the unexpected. There'll be some subject that comes up and takes more time than people think it will. No idea what that will be. But if anybody else has any questions or comments, so we can open the microphone one last time. I know that many of you here could speak at length, but it's fine if you don't. on the ICANN 78 experience. So we will be having a NARALO planning team for ICANN 79. Anybody here who is a NARALO member or fellow traveler is more than welcome to participate in our planning team. So we look forward to seeing everyone in San Juan in March. I think I saw the dates are the 2nd through the 7th. And I think hopefully it'll be much more weather friendly than Hamburg, although I kind of missed being whipped by rain and cold mist and feeling like it was always damp even when it wasn't. I don't miss it a lot, but I do miss it. In any case, we don't have to take this all the way to 4:30. So I'm going to just thank all of our participants, all of our speakers today for their time and their preparation time and their interest in sharing their views. I'm looking forward to the readout after ICANN 79, of course, but first we have to get there. A big thanks, of course, to staff for all of their work, not least in helping to get this ICANN 78 readout to become a reality and then to keep it running smoothly while it took place. We couldn't do what we need to do at all without staff of all different types. I also want to thank everyone who showed up and was part of the audience. I think we have a very interesting cross-section of folks, not just from NARALO and at large, but I see a couple of ISOC New York folks here, ISOC DC. So I want to thank everyone who showed up. I hope everyone thought this was a worthwhile session. And if anybody has any comments, please feel free to give them to me about how we could make this even better the next time. We are all trying to improve continuously. So with that, and without any further ado, I will say adieu and ask that this meeting be brought to an end. The recording stopped and we will adjourn. Thank you all.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.